remains today one of the most vexing of all human questions. Answers have been offered which range from the sacred to the profane, complex to simple, scientific to romantic, political to individual. But instead of examining the multitude of answers to this question, let's look instead at a very specific and basic process which occurs when a person asks and then answers the question, who am I? What is my real self? What is my fundamental identity? When someone asks, who are you? We proceed to give a reasonable, honest, and more or less detailed answer. What, in fact, are you doing? What goes on in your head as you do this? In one sense, you're describing yourself as you've come to know it, including in your description most of the pertinent facts, both good, bad, worthy, worthless, scientific, poetic, philosophic, religious. You understand as fundamental to your identity. You might, for example, think, I'm unique, being endowed with certain potentials, I'm kind but sometimes cruel, loving but sometimes hostile, I'm a father and lawyer, I enjoy fishing and basketball, and so your list of feelings and thoughts might proceed. Yet there's an even more basic process underlying the whole procedure of establishing an identity. Something very simple happens when you answer the question, who are you? When you're describing or explaining or even just inwardly feeling yourself, what you're actually doing, whether you know it or not, is drawing a mental line or boundary across the whole field of your experience, and everything on the inside of that boundary you're feeling or calling self, while everything outside it you feel to be not self. Your self-identity, in other words, depends entirely upon where you draw that line. You're a human, not a chair. You know that because you consciously or unconsciously draw a boundary line between humans and chairs and are able to recognize your identity with the former. You may be a very tall human instead of a short one, so you may draw a mental line between tallness and shortness and thus identify yourself as tall. You come to feel that I am this or and not that by drawing a boundary line between this and that and then recognizing your identity with this and not your non-identity with that. So when you say myself, you draw a boundary line between what is you and what isn't you. When you answer the question, who are you, you simply describe what's on the inside of that line. The so-called identity crisis occurs when you can't decide how or where to draw the line. In short, who are you means, where do you draw the boundary? All answers to that question, who am I, stem precisely from this basic procedure of drawing a boundary line between self and not self. Once the general boundary lines have been drawn up, the answers to that question may become very complex, scientific, theological, economic, or they may remain most simple and unarticulated. But any possible answer depends on first drawing the boundary line. The most interesting thing about this boundary line is that it can and frequently does shift. It can be redrawn. In a sense, the person can remap their soul and find it in territories never thought possible, attainable, or even desirable. As we've seen, the most radical remapping or shifting of the boundary line occurs in experiences of the supreme identity. For here, the person expands her self-identity boundary to include the entire universe. We might even say that she loses the boundary line altogether. When she's identified with the one harmonious whole, there is no longer any outside or inside, and so there's nowhere to draw the line. This is as tall as lions. The witness simply observes the stream of events, both inside and outside the mind-body, in a creatively detached fashion, since in fact the witness is not exclusively identified with either. In other words, the individual realizes that his mind and his body can be perceived objectively. He spontaneously realizes that they can't constitute a real subjective self. This is a huge step forward. It's a necessary, important step in meditation, but it's not ultimate. When the witness or the soul is finally undone, then the witness dissolves into everything that is witnessed. The subject-object duality collapses, and there is only pure non-dual awareness, which is very simple, very obvious. Like the famous Zen master said when he got his enlightenment, when I heard the bell ring, suddenly there was no I and no bell, just the ringing. When as a specific type of meditation, you pursue the observing self, the witness, to its very source and pure emptiness, that no objects arise in consciousness at all. This is a discrete, identifiable state of awareness, namely unmanifest absorption or cessation, variously known as Nirvikalpa Samadhi, not Jnana Samadhi, Ayan, Nirgasan, Nirodh, classical, Nirvana, the cloud of unknowing. This is the causal state, a discrete state, which is often likened to the state of deep, dreamless sleep, except that this state is not a mere blank, but rather an utter fullness, and is experienced as such, as infinitely drenched in the fullness of being, so full that no manifestation can even begin to contain it, because it can never be seen as an object. This pure self is pure emptiness. Which might be what Jesus meant when he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The contemplative traditions are based on a series of experiments in awareness. What if you pursue this witness to its source? What if you inquire within, push deeper and deeper into the source of awareness itself? What if you push beyond or behind the mind into a depth of consciousness that's not confined to the ego or the individual self? What do you find? As a repeatable, reproducible experiment in awareness, what do you find? There's a subtle essence that pervades all reality, begins one of the most famous answers to that question. It is the reality of all that is and the foundation of all that is. That essence is all. That essence is the real. And thou art that. In other words, this observing self eventually discloses its own source, which is spirit itself, emptiness itself. And that's why the mystics maintain that this observing self is a ray of the sun that is the radiant abyss and ultimate ground upon which the entire manifest cosmos depends. Your very self intersects the self of the cosmos at large, a supreme identity that outshines the entire manifest world, a supreme identity that undoes the knot of the separate self and buries it in splendor. So from matter to body to mind to spirit, in each case consciousness or the observing self sheds an exclusive identity with a lesser and shallower dimension and opens up to deeper and higher and wider occasions until it opens up to its own ultimate ground in spirit itself. And the stages of transpersonal growth and development are basically stages of following this observing self to its ultimate abode, which is pure spirit or pure emptiness, the ground, path, and fruition of the entire display. All right. It's not going where I wanted it to go, so I'm going to have to stop. Let's look at the Advocate. Let's see where God is here. Is that who I think it is? That looks like Lily Tomlin. That can't be Lily Tomlin. No, that's funny. Okay. That's John Voight, that's for sure. September Dawn, huh? Who thinks it's good? So you have to consider the source. Right? Because anybody could say, great, where are we? Of course, you can't read these people's names. It looks like it's Jeffrey Lyons, so I don't always agree with him. Yeah, these don't look like good reviews. And that's why they have the sources so small. No. That looks like it's not good. Let's see what the paper gave it.